The energy crisis today is destroying Europe. It is bankrupting America, and it has turned Russia into the world's most sanctioned country. However, China is the big winner, raking in tons of money from this crisis. In fact, the country is still expected to grow by 3% this year, while the West is heading into a recession, especially once winter arrives. And this is the big problem with sanctions. It doesn't destroy value, it just shifts it from one side of the world to the other. Now, Europe has been enjoying cheap Russian gas for a long time, and this meant they could power their industry and grow their economy at an alarming rate. Now, according to Zoltan Poza, $20 billion of Russian gas controls almost $2 trillion of German manufacturing value. But all of this has changed. Russia has shut off the gas pipelines and Europe is on the brink of freezing over winter. Gas prices in Europe have shot up from less than $20 to over $300 at its peak. And this is going to spike again as the EU plans to impose another gas price cap. And we all know that's a horrible idea that will backfire, but this is the perfect scenario for China. In fact, China will become filthy rich if they impose more price caps. And we have to understand the objective of all these oil and gas sanctions. Their main purpose is to cut away or reduce Putin's sources of revenue. As long as Russia makes less money and their economy suffers, it's mission accomplished. However, the rest of the world still needs energy. Europe still needs gas. Nothing has changed. In fact, the situation is more urgent than ever before. And guess what? China has been buying Russian gas and reselling it back to Europe at extreme markups. Putin's gas supply is still reaching Europe, and according to a report, China has been buying Russian LNG for half the price and they are stockpiling gigantic amounts. From just July to August this year, China's LNG imports from Russia grew by over 70%. And because China's economy is still in lockdown, a lot of this cheap gas is being rerouted back to the international markets, including Europe. So we have to understand the situation. Russia is now selling their energy at a huge discount and earning much less revenue. Europe is buying gas at much higher prices, and it's China that is the big winner from all these sanctions, and you can't make this stuff up. And there are even rumors that the profit from selling just one of these LNG cargo can range from the tens of millions to over $100 million. Money is flowing from the west to the east, but this direct financial gain is just one example of China winning big from the sanctions. And we are going to examine how China is increasing their influence in the world thanks to the Western sanctions and this energy crisis. Now, one of China's main goals is dethroning the US dollar. We all know this. They want to poke holes in the dollar's dominance and internationalize their own currency, the Chinese yuan. And because the West is sanctioning Russian energy and Russia needs money, there's only one outlet that Putin can count on, and that's China. So both countries have decided to effectively dump the dollar and exclude it in their energy sales. Gazprom is now selling gas shipments to China exclusively for payments in the Chinese yuan and Russian rubles. Now, this is a strategic move that the mainstream media is kind of brushing off like it doesn't mean much, but I want us to remember the origins of the petrodollar. The dollar became the world's reserve currency because it was needed to buy essential commodities like oil and gas. If you wanted to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, you needed to settle in US dollars. Nothing else was accepted. And this is what China is trying to set up. They are trying to develop their own petro yuan to challenge the existing world order. However, in the past it was difficult. No country would want to accept yuan over dollars because of the established network effect. The dollars had more end users, so it made kind of more sense to buy and sell using the greenback. In fact, just a few years ago, Russia was selling their commodities to China mostly in US dollars, but all that has changed once the sanctions happened. Russia's dollars and euros are now as good as monopoly money, and they rather take alternative currencies. And this is where China swoops in with the yuan as an alternative to Russia. Russia needs yuan to buy finished goods from the Chinese factory, while China is happy to pay in yuan because it sends an important signal to the world. It is telling other countries that, hey, you don't need just the dollar to buy commodities anymore. If you want to buy energy, Russia, the biggest exporter of oil and gas, accepts the yuan. And this is something very important that many countries are paying attention to, especially those that are sanctioned by the West. Now, on the other hand, China is also removing a big problem that they always had, holding too many US dollars. And we know the tensions between China, Taiwan, and the United States are getting worse. China still has close to $1 trillion of US treasuries, which technically can be frozen. China's already been hit with a lot of technology sanctions today. The US is preventing them from buying a lot of microchips from American companies such as Nvidia and AMD. So it's not a stretch to imagine a scenario where China crosses a so-called boundary and gets their assets frozen. Now, if the Chinese yuan grows as a reserve currency, China can start to slowly offload their treasuries without worrying about holding dollars to buy commodities. We have to remember that China is a net importer of commodities, so they need lots of dollars to buy oil from Saudi Arabia. But now that Russia can deliver China commodities in exchange for the Chinese yuan, China can now hold even fewer dollars. The dollars can now be used to hoard tons of commodities from other parts of the world and transport them back to the east while there's still time. And according to the US Department of Agriculture, by mid-2022, China will hold 69% of the world's corn, 60% of its rice, and over half of its wheat reserves. They are stocking up all of the essential commodities just in case something happens. They are furiously de-dollarizing and buying up hard assets that they need. So you can see who is really benefiting more from the yuan for gas deal. China's walking away with the lion's share. They are bringing home cheaper oil and gas while strengthening the case for the yuan as a world reserve currency. Sure, China has a lot of domestic problems. Their real estate sector is in a big mess and the bank runs are a serious issue. But when it comes to global influence, China is scoring home runs thanks to the actions of the West. The United States and the Eurozone are scoring own goals. China is going to be making record profits from their energy deals and use their newfound wealth to stock up on hard commodities, something that cannot be printed from thin air. So just understand that all these sanctions, they are hurting the pockets of Europe, Russia, and the United States. They are benefiting China. And this is most evident when it comes to the gold market. They have learned a lesson at Russia's expense, which is not to keep your foreign reserves in the West. And that's why they are selling off their dollar assets, taking the proceeds and snapping up gold. The Chinese are furiously buying up gold like there's no tomorrow. And we can see China has been aggressively buying Swiss gold, increasing their imports to a 5-year high. In fact, the whole world is stockpiling gold, with China leading the way with over 80 tons bought in July alone. Discounted Russian gold is also flowing into China, surging by 750% in July. So real wealth is flowing from the West and it's also flowing from Russia into China. And the thing about all these rate hikes that we are seeing is the demand destruction they are causing. A lot of people are getting a whole lot poorer really fast. And this causes asset prices to crumble, including precious metals. We have seen silver's price collapse by 15%. Gold is also down over 6%. But the Chinese don't care. They know this is real physical wealth that can't be confiscated. And a discount sounds real good to them. And we don't know exactly why China is holding so much physical gold. Are they planning to secure their wealth before planning something big? Are they trying to put the yuan back on a gold standard? And these are very important questions that the West just isn't thinking about. The only thing in their minds is about how to hurt the Russian economy more, not realizing that China is getting rich off their plans. Or maybe they do realize what's happening and they just don't care. They just want to take down Russia at any cost. But the real agenda here isn't just about holding tons of gold or buying cheap oil or even getting to dethrone the US dollar. Those are just instruments to the end goal. Those are just stepping stones. If we actually look behind the curtain, we can see the real aim is to split the current world order apart. We're already moving towards a multipolar world. China is just accelerating the process. We know that the China's Belt and Road Initiative isn't some altruistic plan to build up developing nations. It is an economic plan to connect China, Asia, to the Middle East and Europe. That means giving loans to countries to build bridges and develop ports. And many of those loans are denominated in the Chinese yuan. Indonesia, for example, took a hefty loan worth over $5 billion to build its high-speed railway. Now, 40% of this debt is denominated in the Chinese yuan, and this is significant. China is creating demand for their yuan from these loans. The more countries that transact in yuan or owe yuan to China, the more they have to hold and acquire China's currency. And this keeps the demand for the yuan strong and keeps it propped up. Right now, we're also seeing a lot of countries willing to issue yuan denominated bonds, which is significant for China. Right now, the majority of foreign debt is issued in US dollars, which stands at over 60% today. That's a lot. And this creates an insane demand for dollars. And that's why we are seeing many countries like Sri Lanka defaulting on their debt because they have a dollar shortage. The currency crisis going on today is a dollar shortage crisis. But now, we have countries like Egypt looking to issue $500 million in yuan denominated debt. But that's not all. Private companies are now also issuing yuan bonds as well. We have a bunch of Russian companies doing this. We have Rosneft, the Russian oil giant, offering yuan denominated bonds worth 15 billion. Polyus, Russia's biggest gold producer, issued 4.6 billion, and Rusal, Russia's aluminium producer, issued 2 billion worth of yuan bonds. In fact, the demand for corporate bonds in yuan has overtaken the demand for dollar-denominated bonds for the first time in many years. There's a big shift in the demand from dollar to yuan bonds that many aren't really talking about, especially from March onwards after the sanctions hit Russia and the Federal Reserve started to tighten. We can see the borrowing cost of dollars rising towards 4.5%, while the borrowing cost of the yuan is falling down towards 2.5%. It is now cheaper to borrow the Chinese yuan today, so many countries are doing it. All this is a consequence of the sanctions and the inflation hell the West is going through today. By sanctioning Russia, you make energy prices soar. And now that inflation is out of control, you have to hike rates to destroy demand, making the dollar less competitive. And this makes China the biggest winner in this economic disaster. Now here's the deal. The more sanctions that are piled onto Russia and the longer they last, the richer China is going to become. They are gaining more economic power where it matters. They are enjoying cheap Russian oil to sustain their economy while making a nice profit reselling it to Europe. They are stockpiling more gold at a cheaper price to secure their assets. But the biggest impact is China's move to de-dollarize the world. The more trade deals or bonds that are transacted using the Chinese yuan, the more the dollar loses its standing as the world reserve currency. So this situation is just going to continue. Right now, the Eurozone is still discussing about possible gas price cap on Russia, and if this happens, we can expect Russia to keep the gas taps off. They will continue to sell cheap LNG to China, who will then resell it back to the world and profit. And once again, we must understand the consequences of any financial decision, especially when it comes to sanctions. When you decide to sanction a commodity giant like Russia, it will backfire in many unexpected ways. It is hurting both sides, those imposing the sanctions and the target of the sanctions themselves. And as winter approaches, we are going to see people in Europe get much poorer as inflation goes through the roof. But it will be China who will be laughing all the way to the bank. So let me know what you think. Are the Western sanctions backfiring? What other plans does China have in store for the world? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.